And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 251. Today we're talking about the notion of the power of two, or rather we're looking at the challenge submissions. 2 weeks ago I went in depth about this notion of two subjects in the same image. Today then I said a challenge, and today we're going to be looking at the submissions that people have sent in. So stick around, leave a comment, let me know you're here, all the usual stuff, and we can make a start. So yes, welcome to episode 251. Here we are live on Facebook. So if you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Tell me where you're from. Tell me what the weather's doing. We can get the chat started. Also, little heads up warning. I still haven't managed to get the computer fixed, and it's getting worse with its crashes and restarts and random reboots and all the rest of it. So if I suddenly go missing during the course of this one, then please hang around for a little bit just to be on the safe side, and I will try and reconnect. It takes a couple of minutes for the computer to reboot itself. I may be able to reconnect. If it really looks like I can't, then I'll leave a comment either in the comments if it's still kind of sort of connected and I can, or in the bits below. Yeah. A little bit ahead. I'm sitting here really as worried as I've ever been about whether this is going to happen. So I see what a couple of comments in or people in here already. So let's just see what we've got. We've got April says, greetings from a mostly cloudy Long Island, New York. May have thunderstorms. Marilyn says, hello from a sunny Colorado. Susan joins us from a rather cloudy Kakubri. Looks like it could rain any minute. Yeah, here in Castle Douglas it's kind of, but we've already had some rain and we've had some sunshine, and it's kind of a little bit of everything, to be honest. But yeah, changeable day. Susan's 9 miles west of here, so generally speaking, whatever weather system is coming along will usually hit her first, unless we've got Privet and the wind's going in the opposite direction. Viji says, hello everyone from a pleasant weather in Chennai, and Robert joins us, says, howdy all from a cloudy Texas. Excellent. Well, if you haven't done so already, please click the like on the video here, on the podcast, because hopefully, I think that, shows YouTube that this is worth watching. It might actually flash it up in a couple of other people's feeds at the same time. What else do we need to do? Right, okay, so yes, we have people, we have a podcast. But before we make a start on the main chunk of looking at images that have been sent in, quick update on the Smug Points. So, Smug Points, current contributions. So, top contributors for July. As we go into the very last week, episode of July, it's neck and neck. Nadia, Janet and Susan are all sitting on 40 Smug Points each. Marilyn and John have 35 Smug Points. So all to play for on this one here. So we are looking at this being a challenge podcast. It means that if you have submitted an image, then you get an automatic 10 Smug Points to be added to this. If you happen to be live here right now watching, leave a comment and you get a bonus 5 Smug Points. So don't be sitting there all quiet, because you could miss out on the bit that tips the balance. And at the end of this, I will be going through my favourite first, second and third, so an extra bonus 30, 20 and 10 Smug Points, and maybe a couple of commendeds for a bonus 5 points as well. So at the end of this, everything will have jiggled around and somebody out there will be July's winner, in which case they get to choose the topic of conversation or topic of photography and challenge for August. So start having a think about that one. Right, so where are we? Okay, so we have Smug Points out of the way, we have people, we have a computer that could crash at any moment. I'm aware that I've got this sitting in the background of my head, so so I'm more likely to be making mistakes and tripping up over my words. So forgive me for that. Anyway, Anne's joined us, also says good morning from Texas. Excellent. Right, well, where are we going to start then? So yes, let's a quick introduction then to this notion of the power of two. So 2 weeks ago, episode 249, I went in depth about this idea of the power of two subjects, and it was suggested by Anne from Texas as a topic. And it's this notion that sometimes what happens is people, there's been complaints, suggestions. A few people have said that in their camera clubs that there's this notion that sometimes if you put in something which has 2 subjects, people go, yeah, all very well, but you really want to have the rule of odds, or you want to have 3 or something like that. As though somehow 2 is inferior to 3. But also what happens is sometimes you're coming from 1. And the whole thing got me thinking, and actually 2, for the most part, tends to be a topic in its own right. It's not the same as having 1 subject, and it's not the same as having 3. So 2 kind of occupies this space of its own. And generally speaking, what happens when you have 2 subjects is the biggest part of that photo becomes the relationship between those 2 subjects. That becomes the key part of the narrative. So I went in depth on that, looked through all sorts of ideas. So if you really want to explore that, make a note that after you've watched this, or if you're watching this in the recording of this, you could click pause, go back, watch episode 249, come back, take a look at this, have a better understanding of where everybody's entries are coming from. But that was the idea of the power of 2. So we set the challenge, and we've had 8 or 9 people send in images. So we're going to go through them. And what we're going to actually do is we're going to start with Anne as well. It was Anne's suggestion, and I think also, generally speaking, alphabetically, Anne tends to come first as well. So what we will do is... Nadia's joined us as well. It says hello from Fife. So let's flip over to here. So this is Anne's entry for the power of 2. And Anne says these were taken at Longview, Texas National Balloon Race in June 2024. It was a very, very hot day, but I managed to get a couple of good shots. And this is a good start. This is almost power of 3, actually, because we have the moon up there as well as part of it. But given the fact that, generally speaking, if you're pulled this far out, we're not overly noticing the moon. This notion is that this is the power of the 2 balloons. And what happens is when we have the 2, if we consider the idea, if there was a single balloon, all our attention would be on the 1 balloon and its shape. But because we have 2, we kind of start creating a comparison. Because they are both hot air balloons, we notice that there's a colour difference, potentially a size difference. Now, one might be bigger than the other, or they both might be the same size, but one is slightly in front of the other. Which I'm guessing is probably the case, because if we look at the basket size, the basket of the one on the right looks slightly larger than the basket of the one on the left, and both sets have 2 people sitting in them. So we can assume that the baskets are about the same size, so therefore the balloons, it's not that the one on the right is actually bigger, it's the fact that the one on the right is slightly further forward. So we have a slight forward back. We've got these, they're both, while they are both kind of checkered, we've got different colours showing. And what's also quite nice with this is the diagonal. It's the fact that Anne's got this on a diagonal, and as we've talked before, diagonals add a level of energy to a topic. If you imagine both these balloons exactly the same level of forward and back, and on an identical horizontal line, it probably wouldn't be quite as powerful. Whereas a little bit of diagonal. And also, we're noticing the diagonals of the colour. So the reds of these are shooting at the yellows. You know, each of the pattern on the balloons has the diagonal as well. So that all kind of adds it together. And so it feels like a good start to this notion of when we're talking about the power of 2. If you had a third one in here, it would change the dynamic again. It would be a different kind of photo. So the 2 really is its own idea. It's not 1, it's not 3, it is 2, and it works as a 2. A couple more messages here. Meg's joined us and says, hello everyone. Viji says, a beautiful shot, and April also says, that would have been fun and pretty balloons. And Susan says, great colours and definitely attention grabbing. And then a couple of people are saying hello Viji and thanks, and bits of chat, which is fine. Have the chat in the chat room. That's part of what chat room is about. You can chat to me, you can also chat amongst yourselves. Right, okay, so thank you, Anne, for sending that one in. So next up, we're going to go to April. Now, I will say this isn't entirely in alphabetical order, but sometimes there's a little bit of that comes into play. And this one, I really quite like this one too. April says, this is my submission for the power of two. It is an Amish couple who wore all black clothes. I thought they looked thought-provoking as they walked as a couple along a barren street. And yeah, there's something really quite moving. The fact, enhanced by the notion of the black and white as well. Although this could still be quite interesting in colour, given the fact that I guess you would have probably ended up with the sort of yellowy golds of the hay, and possibly matching up with the straw hat on the man, and then the black clothing as well. But making it black and white does make it feel quite timeless. So this could be taken anything over the last 100 years, really, that it wouldn't have looked much different. But again, in terms of a power of two, what you have is you have two people here, and those two people, it's very different from if one of them was alone, or if there was a third person. If you moved into a third person, you're starting to move into the notion of group dynamics, but this is a couple. But then you see them as a couple, we have this sense of it being a female and a male, and we're then sort of slightly studying body language. There is a little gap between them. They're not holding hands as they're walking. And bit by bit, you start building a little story. How accurate that story is, no idea. Doesn't really matter. Nobody's going to be chasing them afterwards and saying, oh, so-and-so was discussing this picture we saw of you. We were taking bets who was the most accurate on the story being your relationship. No, we're looking at an image. We don't know who these people are, but we can't help but create a story. And within that story, this is the point, is that at the moment you have a second subject, you start to create a relationship between the two subjects. And it's how strong that relationship, or how much story, or what a narrative that you kind of start building into that relationship between the two subjects, which I think is what tends to make the power of two. Is it stronger? Is it less than? Does it make any difference if there's more than one or less than three? And it's all to do with that relationship between the two subjects. Susan says, love this, April. I could make up all sorts of stories about this couple. I think that's true. So yeah, thanks for sending that one in, April. Oh, Viji says, April, I like the photo. It's like a yesteryear pic. Transported me back to watching some Second World War movies, like a Netflix movie or something. Excellent. Right, okay. So now what we're going to move on to is Janet. And Janet sent us through this one, which says, I have attached my image for the Power of Two challenge. I had a couple of other ideas, but they didn't work for me. So I ended up shooting these two condo buildings in Mississauga known as Marilyn Towers. And so what's happening here is it's very much a looking up at these two separate buildings. And the important part here is that there is the gap between them. And if Janet had moved around just a fraction to her right, then they would have overlapped and actually not necessarily been quite as clear as the fact that there was two separate towers as opposed to just the one. So it kind of works. Is there vastly difference between one or three? It's a little bit. I think the fact that there is more than one, I don't know, there's not so much of this tower here in the second one. And this first one, we've got much more of a sense of the twists and the curves in the shape to it. The second one feels slightly kind of like it's almost intruding or just a bit of an add-on. So although it's two buildings, the relationship is really a sense of it's just more than one. So there is a kind of relationship there, but I don't think it's necessarily quite as strong as and this is kind of what I'm talking about before, which is, and I'm going to continue talking about all the way through this podcast, because the point of this podcast, the point of this challenge, the point of all this notion of the power of two is to really try and embed in your understanding the notion of what is it, why would you have two subjects as opposed to three, as opposed to one? Okay, so if you would have had one but you're having two, there has to be a big reason for having the two. what happens is, what's the change? What's the difference? Is it a dramatic difference? Is it a big difference? Or is it only a subtle difference? Likewise, if you're moving from 3 to 2, what's the difference between that? And so here we have the two buildings, we have the relationship between, but what's the relationship between the buildings much beyond the fact that there's two of them? I mean, obviously there's some relationship, but I don't know that it's not pushing the boundaries, it's not really forcing us to kind of think too much. So what's Susan saying? Well, most unusual architecture, Janet. At first I thought it was 3 buildings, but now I see it's 2. Yeah, for that, yes, because this bit on the right does look like it could be a separate building coming up, but you can see if you move in over on the right here that it is joined. I can't help but think perhaps it's the composition with this. I think maybe a slightly different composition which allowed more of the 2 buildings to be seen clearly as the 2 buildings could work a little bit better with this. But thanks for sending this one in, Janet. Certainly gives us some ideas to start thinking about how we're approaching this topic. Now, in the opposite way, to go from Marilyn Towers to Marilyn in Colorado, is sending us in, so where are we? Lost it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Right, okay, here we go. Yes, so this is Marilyn's photo. And so from Marilyn Towers to Marilyn, yes, I knew there was a link somewhere. It says, I was taken with your idea of echoes of the subject, so I tried to accomplish that in the attached photo of cone flowers. I focused on the 2 flowers together and then tried to get all the others blurred so they appeared as echoes. The 2 subjects are not as sharp as I would like, but it seems to work okay. Okay, now this is an interesting one because this is almost, well, this is in the opposite direction to Janet's previous photo as well, where you've got 2, but you're kind of saying, and this one is 2 because 2 of them are in focus, but we can see that there's a lot more. Now, there's a lot of the others, they are then, all the others are out of focus, so, but they're still, some of them, they're still playing a really strong part in the image. And I would say a photo like this feels more like the kind of group dynamics photo rather than necessarily the power of 2. And in a way, I almost feel like if you were to remove one of these, if you just had one of these flowers in focus, but then had the rest of them as echoes, I can't help but feel that would be a slightly more powerful photo. When you've got the 2 here, we're kind of looking back and forth between them, trying to find the relationship between the 2 flowers, but then all the echoes behind are making a slightly noisier image. It's kind of filling up the space and kind of pulling our attention away from the dynamic between the 2. So you either need to have the 2 against a kind of grassy background, or you have 1 and then you have the echoes. Now, if you're trying to do the power of 2, now I did an echoes one before, where essentially I had 1 flower and then there was 1 strong echo. That's my essential kind of sense of where you can start doing with the power of 2. But it's a kind of a trickier one to really explore, I think, with this. So it's back to this. It's not to say that it's a bad photo. I like the idea of flowers and echoes. I just think for a topic such as the power of 2, I'm not sure that this one fits quite as well. Hoping that makes sense. But again, an interesting one to send in. I think maybe at this point, what I want to do is, what's that? Viji says, pretty flowers. It would have been a beautiful experience photographing. Well, that's true. I mean, it's not. Some of these photos, you see, it's not that they're saying, I'm trying to say that they're a bad photo. It's just that what we're trying to do is these photos are needing to fit into this particular challenge. And for anybody who is ever sticking their photos into, whether it's PhotoCrowd, ViewBug, Guru Shots, these online competitions, or you're working with or your camera clubs and you're submitting images, the point is that the images have to try and fit as best they can into the topic that has been set. So, I mean, in an obvious kind of way, if the topic is people in black and white, and you put a picture of a colourful giraffe into it doesn't matter how fantastic this giraffe is, it's not going to score highly. So you might have the best photo in the world, but if it's in the wrong competition, it's not going to score. And that's a key aspect to our photography. There's the notion we can take photos for ourselves, but the minute we're putting those photos into any kind of challenge or contest where other people are going to be looking at them, and beyond that, other people are going to be judging them, and judging them in comparison to other entries into that challenge or competition, then at that point we've got to make sure that not only is our photo well taken, it's got the right level of focus and it's nicely composed and it's got good colour matches and all the rest of it, but it really has to fit the topic as best it can. Let me go to another one here, because what I want to do is let me show you this photo. Now, Viji sent me a couple of photos. We were bouncing backwards and forwards. This is not Viji's entry, by the way, but I did want to kind of use it as an example that if I open, well, maybe I don't even need to open it in this. Let's just go to here. Right, what we have is we have two fruits in a tree. Now, I didn't recognise the fruit. I asked Viji what it was. Viji said this is from the calabash tree. In Tamil we call it kabalam fruits, which translates to skull in English. They're not common in Chennai though, but she saw them in a botanical garden. And so what she's done is she's taken the photo and we have the two fruit hanging down off the tree. Now, the thing about that the point that I wanted to make here is that while you can say yes to subjects, it's not necessarily a powerful power of two photo. Because if there was one instead of two, it wouldn't be significantly different. If there was three instead of two, it wouldn't be significantly different. Yes, there's maybe a difference between having one fruit and having multiple fruits hanging in the same tree. But when we're talking about the power of two, what we've got to do is we've got to decide, are we going from one fruit, and if we are adding a second subject, is it significantly adding to the narrative, enhancing the narrative, changing the narrative, creating a relationship between the first and the second subject? Or if we're coming from three, which is more moving into group dynamics, and we're coming to two, is there a reason for getting rid of the third one? Are we kind of trying to pull down, isolate, create a different narrative by isolating two subjects out of 3, 4, 5, 6, many? Right? And so this photo here, like I say, it's not Viji's actual entry. She sent me several images. We talked back and forth about this. But it's that notion of, if you're talking about two subjects, this is essentially the weakest form of a two-subject image. It doesn't allow for significant difference between 1 and 2. Now, if your topic was green fruit, then great. This is going to fit. That's not a problem. The problem is if you're talking about the topic being the power of two. So I hope that kind of makes sense, okay? That's really what I'm trying to get across. And so I am probably talking more in this. I mean, usually in a challenge session, I'll just go through and say what we love about each of the photos. But in this one, I'm maybe being slightly more critical because I just feel it's really important to try and get across what we mean by the power of two, as opposed to almost the incidental of two, if that makes sense. Okay, well, to go on then to what Viji did actually send through as her subject, she actually used these two little carved ballerinas sitting on a makeup box in front of where the mirror comes up. And Viji says, I took this still life photo for this week's Power of Two challenge. I kept in mind the interaction between the ballerinas. One is swirling and the other is watching the reflection of the other. Though I shot the image in colour, I converted it to black and white for the dramatic effect. So here what we have then is we have the two subjects, and you can just about see, slightly out of focus there, or out of focus and behind them, there are reflections in the mirror. And yeah, two slightly different things. So we've got one with the arm up, the ballerina, and the other one sort of looking across. So it is a case of two subjects, and it is then about the interaction between the two subjects. So now, one of the things I would say with this one, Viji, is that actually I think is, you know, when I move in like that, I think it looks almost slightly more interesting. I think the crop, sort of out here, you're square but not quite square. I think you're just slightly wider than square. And as we've talked before about crops, I tend to feel, rather than being just slightly off square, either go square or go landscape or go portrait, or go cinematic, but find your crop ratio just slightly out off square. Doesn't tend to work quite so well, and we end up with quite a large little chunk at the back here. But if you actually zoom in something like that, I think that actually tends to look like a slightly better composition. And if you really want, you could kind of go in something like this, and it becomes, now with something like this where you come in even closer, what might have been interesting is if you just pulled the mirror up a little bit more and actually had something of the reflections, but maybe then if you'd moved around slightly and you'd had where you could see the reflections without them being blocked by the figures, something like that. So they come in, so if you had the reflections sort of filling in part of the middle here and partly over here because you just moved around to the side slightly, then I think that could have created really quite an interesting photo as well. I like the idea of them not being in focus because we want to have the focus, because if they became too much in focus, then we'd end up with it being a four subject thing, and it might become too complicated in the way that we were talking about Marilyn's pictures of the coneflowers. But anyway, a little thought there is sometimes, again, it's always where do we find the story? And it's always worth playing around, I think, with where you might place the crop. Sometimes we're trying to get, but you know, here we do have the makeup box, and if you feel the box is a significant part of what the story is about, then we need to have it. If it's more about just the reflection side of it, then you don't necessarily need to have so much of the box. It's more about the mirror and the reflection. So understanding what are the key points of the narrative. Is the narrative about the makeup box? Is that a part of the narrative? Or is the narrative really about the two figures? And if it's about those two figures, what can you do with the crop, the lighting, the composition to make sure that that's where, to enhance that narrative? Hope that makes sense. Okay, where are we at? Viji says, okay, Kim, we'll keep the crop ratio in mind. Didn't think about that. Susan says, great idea, Viji, and such a pretty box. Excellent. Okay. So what we're going to do now is move on to Susan. Now, this is a rather lovely photo here. A very soft kind of... so we've got a cotton reel and an old tape measure, and sort of really soft blues and sort of brownish, sort of kind of moving into that yellow brown. I mean, it's not yellow, but it's ish. And there's a colour scheme here which is quite nice. So the background blue is matching the blue of the cotton. The tape here is matching the same colour as the cotton reel itself. Viji says, oh, they dance. It's a mechanical jewellery box. My mother's been there for... it's my mother's been there for more than 40 years dancing ballerinas. Okay, no, I hadn't realised that the ballerinas were actually in the box as well. I thought it was they'd maybe been placed on a... Okay, no, that's interesting. And in that case, then, the box becomes... if that's more of the feature, then I think it's about then looking for ways to maybe actually you could even step back a little bit and make the box the feature. Although at that point, we're still kind of questioning the notion of the power of two, because in essence then the subject is the music box and what's contained within it. So is the subject the music box, or is the subject the two ballerinas within the box? If you get what I mean. So I think it's that's where your thought is. If you go back to the notion of the title of The Power of Two, then it's about the ballerinas. If it's about the music box itself with the two ballerinas within it, it's a different kind of photo. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, come back to Susan's picture. Susan says, my image is of a simple cotton reel and a rather old tape measure. I chose these because they are nearly colour coordinated. The print on the tape measure is very close to the colour on the thread. Oh right, as well, yes, I hadn't even noticed that. Yes, so it's a blue, it's actually a blue print as well. I popped them into my photography box with a similar coloured background. Pure luck that I had this one, as I didn't want to introduce any other colours. This is true, if you place this on a red background or a green background, it would change it completely. Oh, April says, nice still life. A little bit of side lighting helped to show up the thread draped along the bottom. Not much post-processing really, a touch of exposure and contrast and another touch of texture and clarity sliders. I finished with a crop, too much dead space top and bottom. Unfortunately, I can't get rid of the minimalist in me, so it's a very simple image. It was interesting actually, I was just thinking about the notion of minimalism, and just, if I open this up in Photoshop for a moment, just this notion of, because what we've got, there's that notion of dead space, and I suppose that, or negative space, or whatever. Where do you draw the line? Now, there's a slight tangent here, but I thought it was worth maybe just playing with for a moment. So what you've got here is you've got a little bit, roughly about the same kind of space on the edge here as you've got over here, which is what we would expect, roughly the same along the top and along the bottom. But it becomes quite interesting. If we were to, let's say we, okay, let's stretch this out. So I'm going to go to, cancel that, sorry, go to the crop, and I'm going to have a content aware fill rather than a generative expand, because I just want to see what would happen if you actually gave it a little bit more space. Now if I do something like that and hit enter, then we actually change the feel of it slightly. You just talk about too much space. Now it's a tricky thing here, because actually, yes, this one is about the power of 2, so we don't want to have too much space. Does that enhance it? In some ways, I kind of quite like it with a little bit more space around it. The other alternative, I think, is where you go in closer, and you have something like this, where you actually, what you have is you have the reel and a bit of the tape, and that's also giving you your power of 2. But what we're doing then is we're making it about, much more the detail. Or you can kind of pull out and create a bit more space. Now, if you really wanted to, you could pull out a little bit more, something like that. We can go kind of play it on the rule of thirds. And, here we're kind of really coming into the whole negative space idea. Gives us quite a different feeling. Gives that notion of big space, and then at that point your reel and your tape are just sort of sitting inside this sort of large chamber. Totally different feel. However, at this point I think what we're doing is this kind of photo would work in a negative space or minimalism thing rather than the power of 2. But for the power of 2, yeah, absolutely, we go back to your original photo. But I think something might work with a touch more space around it, or, like I say, consider the idea of zooming in. Very often with our photos, it's worth remembering that a lot of the photos are either, we kind of compromise. We don't go close enough, or we don't go far enough back. And sometimes when you've got a photo, it's worth playing around with the crop or whatever, or if you're actually at the point of taking the photo, take a step back, take the photo, take a step forward from where you were, take the photo, and see how that changes. Okay, because a lot of photos I think sometimes end up as a sort of slight compromise with it, when you can actually create a slightly more dynamic image by being closer, or a more contextual image by being fractionally further back. But no, I really like the colour schemes and the soft light in that. It does feel slightly dark. Sort of flip back here a second. I just want to quickly check the levels. Yes, you see, here's your key. If you look over here on the right, at the histogram, there's a massive gap over here. Now, I obviously understand that this is supposed to be quite soft and subtle, but I think you could nudge this up a little bit and just, it sort of brings it up. You don't have to go as bright as that. I think that's overkill. But if we take this up a touch here, something like that. If you're worried about highlights starting to maybe what's happened, I've got that on 35% mask or something. If it's highlighted, just you can turn that to black. Just kind of pull that down a little bit if you don't want the overkill on the highlights. But I think that's an option there, is sort of, bear in mind that sometimes, again, there's another thing depending on your computer screen as to whether a lot of modern day, if you haven't properly color adjusted your screen anyway, then most modern screens tend to show images a little bit brighter and punchier than they are naturally. So what happens is when we come to print them out, they can end up looking darker and duller. But also, if you put them on a color corrected screen as well, is that the color corrected screen, they will look a little bit darker. So be aware of that. I'm not sure whether you have what your screen is like. But yes, if in doubt, just pull up a levels and take a look at the histogram. And if there's a great big gap here, or even here down over on the right, there's actually like where there's 0 bit, there's nothing is bit, then I think you're potentially missing a little bit. Susan says it did look much brighter on my uncalibrated, that's the word, color calibration. Thank you for that. I knew there was a word in there somewhere. Right, okay, so yes. So yeah, like I say, if you're at all unsure, play around with your levels. What else have we got here? Who else? Osho has joined us. Owen, was it? I think. Yeah, welcome. Glad you could join us. Okay. Viji also said both are coils but different. Loving this idea. Yeah, that's a good point as well. Yes, the curl of the tape and the turn of the thread. Right, okay. Where do we move on to? Right, okay. Well, actually, I'll tell you what. Let's just, we're roughly about halfway through. So, just a quick little reminder here that if you are finding these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining even, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can support these podcasts. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, click the notification bell, click like on the video, tell your friends about it, all the usual stuff. We have Jim Reynolds joins us and says, good morning. Welcome, Jim. Glad you could join us. Good morning. So if it's morning for you, I guess you must be stateside, on the other side of the pond. It's mid-afternoon here in the UK, and it's evening over in Chennai, where Viji is in India. Right. Okay, so let's move on to the next image. And the next one we're going to is Robert. And Robert sent in this one and says, I took this photo from a moving bus in Egypt in February. I like the composition and think that the two men juxtapose each other pretty well. The background had a person walking towards the car and there were more people at the end of the alley. I chose to darken and erase as much as I could. This shot reminds me a little bit of the Pink Floyd album cover Wish You Were Here. Thankfully no one's on fire though. For anybody who knows that particular Pink Floyd album, I think I know what you mean. Okay, now this is an interesting one. So Robert took this from a moving bus. He was on holiday in Egypt, looking out the bus window, going click. And now this is an interesting. So this is on the face of it. Yes, we've got a power of two. We've got two people standing in a particular space. I feel slightly less certain about this, what the dynamic is. The man here seems to be standing. He doesn't really look like, well, I mean, he's kind of looking over at him. He's standing, having a cigarette. He looks like he's about to step forward, but he doesn't really look that engaged with this person, another cigarette, taking a swig of water. I think if there'd been more an interaction between them, then it would have been a much stronger photo. Or even a slightly different placement between them. It's back to this notion of, if we're talking about the power of two, then the two subjects, what creates the power of two then is the relationship between the two subjects. It's not just good enough to have two different subjects in the same space, because what happens is we start looking for the story between the two. And in this, there doesn't feel like there's that much of a story. I think if there was more interaction, if they were like in the middle of conversation, or one of them was passing the bottle to the other, or one of them was lighting the other person's cigarette, or there was some kind of stronger interaction, I think something like that would really create a stronger dynamic. Or even if they were positioned slightly differently. I mean, let me just show you what I mean by that, Robert. So, and I'll just close that one from Susan. If I, I'll tell you what, let's duplicate a layer for a moment. Let's do select subject. See what it does here. Okay, so we've got kind of two subjects. We've missed out his arm. Let's just add in a little bit more of him. Okay, so we've got the two subjects, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just copy them, paste them onto a separate layer, and then I think what I will actually do is just cut that and paste that onto a separate layer again. So we've got them, and then I will go back to this one, and what we will do is just remove these. We're going to do them very roughly, very quickly, because it's not really about saying that you don't have two people here. It's just all I want to do is show you what happens when we take these two figures and we place them back in and we move them around. Okay, so in your original photo they're this far apart, but it feels like there's not that much. Whereas if you were to move them closer, that feels much more like something going on. Now they're this close, there's a sense of, you feel like now it feels like he's just about to step into him, or he's just paused while he's stepping into him. Even, interestingly, if they are the other way, he's maybe having his, and he's walking away from him. That creates a different dynamic again. Do you see? So we've got the two figures, and there is a story, there is a feeling like there's something about the relationship that's going on. Interestingly, even if you have them at the opposite ends, or you actually kind of, now something like this, the gap becomes really big, and maybe bringing that car back into shot makes something interesting. But it's almost like that point that you had them here is like almost like the least interesting distance between them. Closer, it becomes more interesting. Further away, and it looks like he's moving towards him, there's something going on here. Or even back to back, I think there's an interesting dynamic. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to show you that, Robert, because your original photo here, I like the light in this, I like the texture, I like the notion of the background, all the rest of it. I think maybe bring down the top a little bit, something like that. But it's to come back to this notion, what it's all about, the power of two is the two subjects and then the relationship between the two subjects. And the more powerful that relationship, the stronger that photo becomes under this topic. And when we talked about that picture of the two fruit is not necessarily giving us anything much more than one fruit. This photo here, and again, I suppose if we flick back to here, if we have one person in it, that's not a bad photo in its own right. There's something about it's the power of one. We have this subject in it. Drinking is, at the end of an alley. That works as a thing. So the question is it significantly enhanced by having the two? And the two in that position, the feeling is that no, it isn't. So the power of two has to be about the relationship that's happening between the two subjects. And if it isn't there, well, then that picture is never going to work quite as strongly. So I hope that makes sense. What have we got? April saying hi to Jim. Viji says you're on fire, Robert. I'm jealous of the variety you bring in. April says love the brief scene. Looks like a brief scene from a movie. A lot of brown hues. Yeah, it's a nice colour scheme, that. And Robert says I agree with your assessment. I think they don't know each other. The one on the left is just walking down the street. Okay, but I mean, I get the fact that you can't. It's not like if you're on a moving bus, you can't hang around and wait for them to move into position. You're just going click. But with all these things, you're on holiday, you're on a bus, you're taking way more photos than you're ever going to use, but you're hoping that some of them are going to land better than other ones. Okay, so let's see, where are we? So yeah, thanks for sending that one in, Robert. Right, next up then we're going to go to Meg. And this was a fun little one here. It was Meg said, "Hi Dad, I was out for a walk down the loch in Castle Douglas, and I also stopped to take a photo of dead trees." And yeah, this is, I something about this I really like as well. So what we have is, yeah, it's a quick photo on the phone down at the side of the Carlin Walk Loch in Castle Douglas, and we've essentially got 2 dead trees. Now there are other things in the shot. In fact, actually, if we really look at the back here, there's a 3rd dead tree just there, but it's sort of significantly enough behind the larger one to feel, to not really get it, to not interfere as such. So essentially what we have here is we've got this tall dead stump, and then we've got this smaller dead stump, and between them there's a shape. Between them we've now got a comparison. We've got the 2 subjects, one is tall and straight, one is shorter and more bent, so they are adding to each other. If you remove either one of these, then the photo doesn't work quite as well. Now, unlike when we talked about with Robert's photo, for example, you remove one of those and possibly the photo is even slightly enhanced. And that's where you really notice the difference in the notion of the power of 2. Whereas this one, if we remove this smaller tree, you've got a single stump, which is okay, but it maybe doesn't have quite the same dynamic. If we were to remove the large one, again, you'd have the single stump, the small one. Interesting, but I think it is enhanced by having the 2 trees together. So that's really where we're kind of moving back into the notion of the power of 2. So nice one there, Meg. Thanks for sending that one in. Robert says, okay, Robert's chatting to Viji, and then Viji says, then April says, I like pics of dead trees. Okay, next on then, we're going to go to Nadia. And Nadia sent in this one. So what we have here is a couple of woodpeckers. So Nadia says, this is my entry for the power of 2. Sorry, just before I get on to that, Viji said it's like a parent chiding the kid. Hold on a second, you've got a... Oh, right, I see what you mean. Yes, a bit like a kind of an adult child and a small, an adult tree and a child tree in a way. Okay. I see where you're coming from. Okay, where was I? Let's flip back to, okay, so Nadia. Yeah, so this is Nadia's pictures of woodpeckers, and she says, this is my entry for the power of 2. I went to a hide near St Andrews where I managed to get nice shots of a red squirrel a while back. So I went back in the hopes of seeing them again. However, on this visit, all I saw was a woodpecker who was later joined by another one. But it was not a friendly encounter, as you will see by the triptych I've also attached. This shows more of a story of the battle for territory. And so this is interesting. So we've got the 2 woodpeckers here together. But what Nadia's also done is she made a triptych out of it. And here we get a much better sense of what's going on. So we've got the stage 1 of the triptych, the flying in, the woodpecker flying in. This one sitting there kind of. Then we've got the next one where this one is sitting dominantly and this one's pulling back. And then we've got the third one where it looks like this one's falling back and it's being chased off. So the triptych actually really makes a much bigger story out of it. Now, Nadia sent in this one as her single image for the power of 2. Partly what I feel with this one though, Nadia, is that it's again a little bit dark and the birds don't stand out quite as much again because it's quite a busy background with all these ferns and the dark wood. I tend to feel that you would need to get the birds brighter, lighter against the background to make them stand out a little bit more. And in a way, if we're talking about a power of 2 dynamic, while that is the 2, I really like this middle one. I think the third one we've got to hunt out for that. We know the second bird is down here, but that doesn't really have the same feel. But actually, I tend to feel that your middle one here really has that sense of the power dynamic. You've got the 2 woodpeckers. This one here is so dominant and leaning over, and this one is so leaning back. This one on the left here, which is what you've done, when we can see it, it could be friend coming in to greet. It could be parent coming in to feed child. It's less notion. But this one here is actually where I feel the real dynamism and action is. So I would suggest that if you were doing a power of 2 shot with the Woodpeckers, this one works out better. Also, I think again the light and tone balance is slightly better. It being slightly lighter, the lightness of the wings here, everything kind of stands out better against the green, whereas it's getting slightly lost in this picture on the left. So I would suggest, Nadia, that basically this middle one here is the strongest set of your triptych if you were to do an individual one. But I do like the triptych. I do like this idea of the 3 together. And we did the triptych challenge last month as well, so I think this one would probably work quite well in that. Yeah, so thanks for sending that one in, Nadia. Great shot. April says nice catch. Viji says wow, Nadia. Susan says great shots, Nadia. Okay, then our final image then, and then I will move on to the bonus smug points part, and what we're looking at here is Martin. So Martin sent in this one here of his wife and daughter. So Martin says, this was taken in a cafe in Budapest earlier this year on Mother's Day. All our kids had travelled from their respective countries to be with their mum and me. I just love the way Annette and Anna are looking at each other. And yeah, this is a lovely photo. And if we're talking, you talk about the power of 2, you're talking about relationships, and it's the relationship between these two which is making the photo. It's the way they are looking at each other, the way they are responding to each other, the way the body language is. And is that notion again of if you remove either one of those, the photo doesn't work as well. If you were to add a third into this, it wouldn't work as well. It would change the dynamics. If you had a third person in here, then that third person would change the relationship. So in terms of a power of 2, this works really well in that sense. And sometimes if you are in something like a power of 2, almost your kind of quick, easy shortcut is that notion of having 2 people together, because there's inevitably a relationship between those 2 people. April says, nice looking family. Viji says, warm and so very endearing narrative. Yeah, the only thing I would say with this one, Martin, is that I think it's probably a little bit wasted space up the top. I think if you just crop it in a little bit, you could, even something like that, where you just get the edge of the cornice and the lighting, if you want to kind of make sure that this is in Budapest, this is part of the background. I think that works slightly better. Just chipping off the top little section, which is slightly less necessary. Something like that I think works quite well. But yeah, lovely photo, Martin, and thank you for sending that one. So that brings us to the conclusion of the images that were sent in. So where are we at then? What am I going to talk? Well, sorry, just before we get there, Susan says, I can see the love between these 2, Martin. Beautiful. So where are we at? So it's kind of a tricky one. This. So what I was thinking of, what are the ones where who's going to get the bonus points? And really, so we're talking about that notion of the power of 2, where if you were to remove one of the subjects and you only end up with 1, it doesn't work as well. That the picture is enhanced by having 2. But likewise, if you added a third, that would change the dynamics and would be a different picture. So something like the fruit, where if you added a third one, wouldn't make a lot of difference, or if you took one away, wouldn't have made a lot of difference. So that becomes part of the kind of driving ideas behind it. And then, as always with these podcasts, depending on the mood I happen to be in, catch me half an hour later or an hour earlier or something, or whether I've had my coffee or not had my coffee, I might have chosen slightly different ones. So, excuses out of the way. What I'm doing, I'm going to start off with then, I think the 30 bonus points, I think, is going to go to April. Something about this couple walking along the road, the timelessness of it, the sense that, like I say, if you remove one of them, it becomes a different photo. And so with this one, April's getting the bonus 30 smug points, I think, for this one. Second up then is going to go to Susan. I have to say that this is a lovely photo, beautifully lit, beautiful colour palette, nice idea, again fits the narrative, where we have two different, we've got the tape and we've got the thread, two different subjects, but they're related subjects, nice colour scheme. The only thing I would suggest is you brighten it up a little bit. But yeah, so Susan gets a bonus 20 smug points for this. And then I think the third, my bonus 10 is going to go to Nadia for this one, for the Woodpeckers. I think that regardless of whether it's the triptych or it's the where are we? Yeah, that's the one I was trying to go to. Like I say, a bit dark, could be lighter. I mean, again, if I take the levels here, you can see this big gap here, and if you just pull that up over here, suddenly it really brightens it up. And I think you could maybe, like you did with the triptych, crop that in a little bit closer, something like that, and I think that works much better. But I know it's extraordinarily difficult to get just to even get a shot like that. So yeah, nice one, Nadia. I think you get the bonus 10 on that. But what I will also do though is a few commendeds here. So bonus 5 smug points, I think, to Meg, to Martin, and to Anne for theirs as well. So, congratulations to everyone. Thank you once, but don't forget 10 smug points to everybody who put in an image and 5 smug points to everybody who's left a comment while we're live. So, yeah, thank you for that. I will add it all up, work out who's won, zap you an email. Oh, well, I'll put the images into, well, not the images, the smug points into our Flickr group. Okay, so the Flickr group, flickr.com/UPwKA/groups, sorry, /groups/UPwKA. There's an ongoing thing, so you can see where everybody is with the smug points there. I'll update that, and then I'll be in touch with whoever's then the leader to start suggesting for next month's topic. Now, if they suggest to me straight away, that could actually be what I start talking about next Sunday. I haven't pinned down next Sundays yet. Part of this has been my worry about the computer and whether it's going to crash on me. If there are, but at the same time, if anybody's got any ideas, if you've got any ideas, topics you would particularly like me to talk about, to cover, to feedback on, to you know, then let me know. Okay, these podcasts are here for you to help you improve your understanding of photography in whatever area or genre or topic or theme or whatever that you would like to see. So let me know, and I can weave that into future podcasts. But in the meantime, if nobody comes up with any ideas or everything's a bit slow, I will do a feedback session for next week. You can always send me in your images for feedback at any time. I'll either include, and I will then include them in the next upcoming feedback session. In fact, it's quite useful for me to even have a little bank of them sitting about. Don't wait until you think there's a feedback session coming up. If you have a photo where you think, you know what, I've got a slight sticking point here, I don't really know what to do with it, how I might improve it, what I could have done differently, could do with feedback from a better another set of eyes, then let me know. Okay, so send me your images, and then when the feedback sessions come round, I've got them ready to go. That certainly makes my life a little easier too. Okay, so everybody's saying well done to various people, and thanks, and have a good week, and all the rest of it. So yeah, so that basically brings us to the conclusion. Thank you once again to everybody who sent in the images. Thank you for all of you who turned up live to say hello, leave little comments, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care. Bye bye.